Jin So-hyun, the ruthless CEO of Korea's most exclusive hotel chain, doesn't make mistakes. Until one rainy night, he welcomes a drenched young woman into his penthouse, mistaking her for a foreign VIP, Kang Ha-eun. A humble florist delivering a bouquet meant for someone else, says nothing, trapped by the warmth she hasn't felt in years. He offers champagne, conversation, and a suite with a view. But what begins as a misunderstanding spirals into days of stolen laughter, secret truths, and emotions neither of them expected. When the lie inevitably unravels, will he see her as a fraud, or as the only woman who ever looked at him without fear? Before we dive into the story, take a moment to leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. The rain wasn't just falling on Seoul, it was laying siege to the city. It was a merciless, relentless downpour, the kind that blurs the lines between the sky and the asphalt, turning the neon lights of Gangnam into impressionistic streaks of color and melancholy. Every drop that struck the panoramic windows of the Seoul Grand Oram Hotel felt like a cold finger tapping on the glass, a constant reminder of the chaos reigning outside. Inside, in the silent sanctuary of the penthouse suite, chaos was a foreign concept. Here, at the top of the world he had built for himself, Jin So-hyun reigned over an empire of order and silence. With a controlled sigh, more an exhalation of discipline than of fatigue, he loosened the knot of his silk tie. The expensive fabric yielded, but the tension in his shoulders remained. Silence was his most trusted business partner. Silence didn't lie, it didn't demand, and it didn't betray. Silence simply was, a polished mirror reflecting the image he projected to the world. Flawless, untouchable, unshakable. At 39, Jin So-hyun was the CEO of Korea's most exclusive luxury hotel chain. He hadn't inherited this throne. He had forged it in the fire of relentless ambition, with the wreckage of less cunning competitors and the ashes of his own personal life paving the way. His empire was immaculate, his reputation a fortress. He walked to the window, his hands in the pockets of his perfectly creased trousers. The city below was a map of his success, a chessboard where he had moved every piece with surgical precision. Mistakes? Mistakes were for other people, for the weak, the sentimental, the unprepared. He was none of those things, which was why, when the doors to his private elevator slid open, revealing an anomaly in his perfectly curated universe, he didn't hesitate. She was standing there, a figure pulled directly from the storm. Water streamed from her dark hair, plastering strands to her pale cheeks. Her clothes, a simple blouse and skirt, were so soaked they had become a second skin, revealing the shiver that racked her slender frame. In her hands, she clutched a bouquet of flowers, almost like a shield. The white and pink petals somehow still looked vibrant, a defiant splash of life against the disarray of her appearance. So-hyun's brain, trained to categorize and assess in nanoseconds, processed the scene. The woman didn't look like she belonged on this floor. She lacked the calculated arrogance of the wealthy and the polished self-assurance of the powerful. But her eyes? There was something about her eyes. It wasn't fear as he would have expected from someone so clearly out of place. It was a kind of profound disorientation, a lost stillness that intrigued him. Then, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The international delegation. Maison Dubois, the French luxury brand with whom he was about to close the biggest partnership deal of his career. His assistant's email had mentioned the arrival of the creative director, a woman known for her artistic genius and eccentric behavior. Perhaps this was she or someone from her party, an artist lost in her own world who had wandered away from the formal reception in the lobby. A VIP. And the number one rule in Jin So-hyun's world was, important VIPs are not questioned. They are accommodated. His decision was instant. his voice cutting through the silence with the authority he used to command boardrooms. "Come in." He gestured into the penthouse hallway, an invitation that was, in truth, a command. The woman blinked, as if waking from a trance. Her lips parted, a word of protest perhaps dying before it was born. But there was something in the inflection of his voice, or maybe just the sheer, overwhelming absurdity of the moment, that compelled her to obey. She took a step forward, the sole of her soaked shoe making a soft, wet sound on the polished marble. The elevator doors hissed shut behind her, and the lie, unbeknownst to either of them, began. She hadn't meant to stay silent. God, she hadn't. Her name was Kang Ha-un, 31 years old, florist, delivery girl, a collector of small, quiet heartbreaks that she stored in a corner of her heart like flowers pressed in an old book. Her life was a tapestry woven from the threads of responsibility and resignation. Her small flower shop, Sori Eopsi, silently, was both her refuge and her anchor, a place where beauty could bloom without demanding anything in return. Tonight, her mission had been simple: deliver an extravagant bouquet, white roses, lilies, and peonies, the kind that whispered promises of forever, to a guest in room 1607, a last-minute order for a marriage proposal. But the storm had turned the city into a labyrinth, and the Grand Aureum itself was a world apart. Intimidated by the opulence of the main lobby, she'd taken a service elevator a hurried staff member had pointed her to, trying to find a shortcut. A wrong turn, a door that should have been locked, and suddenly she was in a deserted executive lobby. The elevator in front of her opened not because she'd called it, but because someone from above was summoning it down. And then, she was face to face with him. A man who didn't look real. He was carved from granite and success, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her shop's rent for a year. The aura of power around him was so palpable, it was almost suffocating. And he spoke to her. He spoke as if she belonged there. The cold was seeping into her bones, an ache that felt like it had settled deep in her soul. She was exhausted from a week of 14-hour days just to keep her business afloat. And for one brief, miraculous moment, someone was being kind. Someone was inviting her out of the rain. So she stepped in. "I'll have the concierge bring up towels and a robe," So-hyun said as he walked ahead, barely glancing back. His voice echoed in the vast space of the penthouse, which felt more like a modern art gallery than a home. I'm okay," Ha-un whispered, her voice faint, almost inaudible. She hugged the bouquet tighter. The flowers, her constant companions, were the only familiar thing in this alien universe. He stopped and turned then. Only then did his gaze truly assess her. Not as a CEO assesses an asset, but as a man notices a woman. He saw the way the cheap cotton blouse clung to her, the smear of mud on the hem of her skirt she'd gotten from dodging a puddle, the uncontrollable tremor in her hands. "You're clearly not," he said, and this time there was a layer of softness beneath the steel in his voice. It was almost imperceptible, but to Ha-un, who was fluent in the language of subtleties, it sounded like a symphony. "There's hot tea, or champagne, if you prefer. You'll be staying on this floor, I assume?" The question hung in the air, weighted with an assumption that was a chasm between them. Ha-un opened her mouth. A torrent of words was ready to spill out. "There's been a mistake. I'm just the florist. I'm lost. Please don't call security." But her jaw locked. He misread her silence. Elegance, discretion, perhaps severe jet lag. High-caliber foreign guests were often reserved, almost enigmatic. He was used to that. And there was something about her, a fragility that wasn't weakness, a quiet strength in her posture despite her condition, that intrigued him more than he cared to admit. It was different from the brazen confidence of the women he usually dealt with, women whose ambitions were as visible as the logos on their handbags. "Wait here," he said, his command voice returning. He disappeared down a hallway, leaving her alone in the center of that immense room. Haun's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the oppressive silence. This wasn't her world. Every object screamed wealth, but a cold, curated wealth. A white leather sofa that looked as if it had never been sat on, a single metal sculpture on a marble pedestal, an entire wall of glass overlooking a city that now looked like a distant galaxy. It was a beautiful place, but a lonely one, like the man who lived in it. I should say something. The thought was a scream in her mind. Now. But what would she say? The humiliation of admitting her blunder felt like a wave about to swallow her whole. "Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding. I'm not who you think I am. I'm just a florist who can't read signs properly. Please don't sue me for dripping water on your 1,000,001 floor." No. The image of his face came back to her. He hadn't looked at her with contempt. Not with the veiled impatience she saw in the eyes of wealthy clients who tossed money at her without making eye contact. He had looked at her with curiosity, and with a particle of something that resembled concern. So she stayed. And when he returned, carrying not a servant but a tray himself with a steaming porcelain cup of ginger and honey tea, she accepted. The warmth of the cup in her cold hands was the first real thing she'd felt in hours. She took a sip, the sweet, spicy liquid sliding down her throat, warming her from the inside out. They sat, he in a designer armchair, she on the edge of the giant sofa, still holding the bouquet like a life raft. They started to talk, lightly at first, about the rain, about how Seoul felt like a different city at night, more honest in its loneliness. He asked if she liked the city. "Yes," she said. "I do." That was true. She loved its pulsing energy, its hidden markets, the quiet palaces nestled between skyscrapers. He asked what brought her here, to his hotel, to his city. Haun hesitated for a beat, the weight of her lie of omission settling on her. Then she glanced at the flowers in her lap and answered with the deepest truth she knew. "Beauty." He nodded, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. A poetic answer. He thought she meant art, fashion, the high-minded purpose of the Maison du Bois visit. He had no way of knowing she meant the miracle of a peony unfolding, the scent of a lily in the morning light, the silent architecture of stems and petals. "I've lived here my whole life," he said, his gaze lost in the rain-soaked cityscape. "And still, most nights, the city feels like a stranger." The unexpected honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She tilted her head, a curious, genuine gesture. "Do you like strangers?" A pause stretched between them. The only sound was the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant drumming of the rain. He considered her, truly considered her, perhaps for the first time that night. The question was simple, but no one had ever asked him that. People asked about profits, about strategies, about his next move. No one asked what he liked. "I don't know anymore," he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice was as shocking to him as it was to her. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick, dense, heavy with all the things neither of them had said to anyone in years. It was a silence of recognition. He watched her. He noticed the way her long, fine fingers curled around the teacup, as if absorbing its warmth. He noticed how her eyes moved around the room, not with the greed or envy he was used to seeing, but with a quiet wonder, as if seeing everything for the first time. He couldn't remember the last time a woman had sat across from him and not tried to impress him, flatter him, or extract something from him. She was just there, and she couldn't remember the last time she had felt so completely seen. He didn't see the tired florist or the drenched delivery girl. He saw a woman. And in his gaze, for a fleeting moment, she felt like maybe she was an interesting one. "The hotel is at capacity tonight because of the conference," he said, breaking the spell. It was a lie. There was always room for anyone he wanted. "But I'll open one of the guest suites on this floor for you. It's the least I can do." She tried to refuse. panic rising again. "No, please, I couldn't. I've caused enough trouble." "It's not trouble. It's a solution," he insisted, his authority returning, but this time it was protective, not domineering. Consider it a courtesy of the house. So she accepted. What else could she do? Just one night, she told herself. That was all. One night to get dry, to get warm, to escape her own life. A small secret. A story to tell herself on lonely nights. But one night turned into two, and two turned into three. The next morning, Haoun woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud. The Egyptian cotton sheets were softer than anything she had ever touched. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then the memory of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat bolt upright, heart pounding. She had to leave. Now. Sneak out before anyone discovered her. She slipped out of bed and found a silk robe hung on the door, along with a set of simple, comfortable loungewear, clearly purchased in a hurry by an assistant and left there while she slept. It was simple, but of a quality she could feel at her fingertips. Beside it, a note written in elegant, precise handwriting. "Breakfast is served at 8. If you need anything, the concierge is at your disposal. JSH. A part of her, the sensible part, screamed at her to ignore the note and run. But another part, a part she hadn't listened to in a very long time, a part starved for a little bit of magic, whispered, "Stay." And she stayed. The first breakfast was a delicate dance of hesitation. They sat at a glass table overlooking the city, which now glittered under the morning sun. The silence was filled by the soft clink of silverware and the aroma of bitter coffee and warm toast. He asked her more questions, and she answered with truths that were just vague enough not to betray her identity. "So, what does an artist like you do when you're not traveling the world?" he asked, a hint of light teasing in his voice. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time. "I work with things that die beautifully," she said. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That sounds fatalistic." "Or realistic," she countered. "I work with flowers." "A florist?" he asked, the tone now openly amused, as if it were the most charming and unlikely idea in the world. He pictured her as some kind of conceptual artist who used flowers in massive installations, not someone who tied ribbons on bouquets. "Something like that," she replied, letting the ambiguity hang in the air like the scent of jasmine. She wasn't trying to trap him, not actively. But every hour she spent in that penthouse, in that silent, luxurious sanctuary, was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about bills, about rent, about dissatisfied clients. She could just be. And for So-hyun, it was a revelation. He had built walls so high around himself that no one had ever bothered to try and climb them. The women in his life came with agendas, with expectations, with a price tag. They wanted his name, his money, his status. But this woman, this enigmatic stranger, she seemed to want nothing. She didn't flatter him. She didn't mention the latest media scandal his company had weathered. She didn't glance at his wristwatch with covetous eyes. She just laughed at his terribly dry jokes. She looked at him not like he was the center of the universe, but just an interesting man sitting across from her. On the second night, the unthinkable happened. They were sitting in the living area, the city lights twinkling below them. A piece by Debussy played softly in the background. So-hyun, lulled by the atmosphere of calm she seemed to exude, found himself talking. He told her about his father, a stern, demanding man who had never offered a single word of approval. He spoke of the crushing pressure of taking over the family business after his father's sudden death. "I worked for 72 hours straight, no sleep," he confessed, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Closing a deal that would save the company. I went straight from the boardroom to his funeral, and I fell asleep, in the front row, from pure, absolute exhaustion." He had never told anyone that. It was a source of deep shame, Proof to him that he had failed as a son at the most crucial moment. He expected a reaction of shock, of pity, maybe even disgust. Ha-un said nothing. She just looked at him, her dark eyes filled with an understanding that transcended words. Then, slowly, she reached her hand across the black lacquer coffee table and rested it on his. Her touch was like an electric shock. A warmth spread from her fingers up his arm, a current that seemed to rewire circuits that had been dead for years. He stared at her hand on his, a small hand with faint calluses on the fingertips, the marks of her real work. And he felt, for the first time in over a decade, understood, not judged, just seen. He found himself anticipating the sounds of her in the penthouse, the soft padding of her bare feet on the hardwood floors, the scent of her hair, a mix of floral shampoo and the first night's rain, the way she would hum an unknown tune while gazing at the skyline. Lost in thought, he should have asked more questions. He should have pressed for answers. Who was she, really? Where did she come from? What was her name? But the truth was, he didn't want to. He didn't want to break the spell. The mysterious woman he imagined her to be was fascinating. But the real woman sitting across from him, with her quietness and her unexpected kindness, was captivating. For once he didn't want to be in control. He just wanted this, whatever this was, to continue. He was falling in love not with a lie, but with a feeling. The feeling of peace she brought into his loud, empty world. And then, on the morning of the fourth day, the world they had built in that small bubble of time came crashing down. The day began like the others. Sun, coffee, a comfortable silence. Ha-un was by the window, holding a single white lily from the original bouquet, which he had placed in a vase and cared for like a treasure. It was the only flower that had survived perfectly. The chime of the service door buzzed, shrill and intrusive. So-hyun frowned. No one came to his penthouse unannounced. He went to answer it, his posture instinctively hardening, the CEO taking over once again. Standing outside was the hotel's junior manager, a young man named Park Min-jun. He was pale, sweating, and he bowed so low his nose nearly touched his knees. "Sir, I'm sorry, 1,000 apologies for disturbing you, sir," he stammered, his voice trembling with panic. "But there is an urgent problem, a major problem." "Breathe, Mr. Park, and speak," So-hyun said, his voice cool and impatient. "It's about room 1607, sir. The guest is furious. The bouquet he ordered for his marriage proposal? It never arrived. We've been trying to contact the flower shop, but the owner hasn't been answering her phone for 3 days. The florist who was supposed to make the delivery, a woman named Kang Ha-un, seems to have vanished. The name, Kang Ha-un. The name didn't hit him like a sound, but like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. His cold, relentless logic connected the dots with brutal speed. The drenched woman, the bouquet, the refusal to give her name, the cryptic answer, "I work with flowers," the florist who had been missing for 3 days, the same 3 days she had spent with him. He turned, slowly, a stiff, mechanical movement. Ha-un was still standing by the window, but she was looking at him now. The white lily in her hand was trembling. Her eyes, which moments before had been filled with a serene calm, were now wide with panic and regret. Their eyes met across the vast expanse of the room. And the spell didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces. "You're not a guest," he said. The words came out cold, hollow, devoid of any emotion. They were a mere statement of fact, which made them all the more cruel. She opened her mouth, but no excuse, no explanation, no lie came. Just the raw, simple truth. "No," she said, her voice a whisper that barely carried. "I'm not." He stared at her, but he didn't see her anymore. He saw the florist, the lost delivery girl, the liar, a stranger all over again, and worse, he saw himself. A fool. A fool who had allowed himself to be played by the one thing he despised most. A feeling. "The night you came here," he began, his voice sharp. "I was delivering that bouquet," she whispered, her gaze falling to the dying flowers on the table. "To room 1607, I got lost. The elevator opened and you thought that you were someone else." The statement was a sentence. She nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. Her heart was in her throat, a physical, sharp ache. "I should have told you, that first night. I swear I was going to. But then, you were kind. And it had been so long since anyone looked at me that way." Her voice broke on the last few words. Her vulnerability didn't reach him. His walls weren't just back up. They were reinforced with steel and rage. "You lied to me," he said, each word a strike. "No," she said, taking a step forward, her hand instinctively reaching out before falling to her side. "I didn't lie. I didn't correct you. I didn't pretend to be rich or famous or anyone else. I was just me. You never asked who I was. You never asked for my name." That hit him. It hurt more than he expected, because it was true, a terrible, accusing truth. He hadn't asked. He had assumed. He had projected a fantasy onto her and fallen in love with his own creation. He, the master of strategy and perception, had been fooled not by her, but by his own assumptions, his own prejudice. His anger turned inward, but it manifested as ice. "I don't know what this was to you," he said, his voice deadly calm. "An adventure? An opportunity? But it meant something to me. And now, I don't know if any of it was real." "It was real," she insisted, tears now streaming freely, staining the serene image he'd had of her. "What I felt was real. I didn't come here looking for you. I wasn't trying to fool anyone. I just stayed. Because with you, I felt like I wasn't invisible." He didn't speak. He just looked away, out at the city that no longer looked like a kingdom, but a prison of his own making. The silence, once a comfortable refuge between them, was now a wall of glass, thick and impassable. She understood. There was nothing more to say. With one last, heartbreaking look at his face, she turned. She placed the single white lily gently on the table, a funeral offering for what they'd had. And then, she was gone. Barefoot, in the clothes he had given her, she walked out of the penthouse and out of his life, leaving behind nothing but a silence that now screamed of her absence. That night, the penthouse had never felt so large, so empty, so cold. The silence was no longer a companion. It was an accuser. Every corner seemed to echo with her soft laughter. Every surface seemed to hold the ghost of her touch. So-hyun poured himself a whiskey, and then another. He sat in the armchair where she had watched him with such kindness, and stared at the white lily she had left. A single, perfect flower amid the sterile luxury of his life. He replayed every conversation, every moment. Her words echoed in his mind. "I work with things that die beautifully. Beauty brought me here. You never asked who I was." She hadn't lied. Not once. She had given him the truth, in small poetic pieces that he had been too blind to see, too deaf to hear. He, the master of strategy and perception, had been duped not by her, but by his own assumptions, his own snobbery. He saw a drenched woman, and instead of seeing a person in need, he saw a stereotype that fit his business narrative. And the ache he felt now wasn't just a sting of betrayal. It was the pain of loss. He hadn't lost an illusion. He had lost the only person who had made him feel real in years. The only person who hadn't wanted the CEO, but who had connected with the exhausted man who fell asleep at his father's funeral. The only person who had looked at him not with awe, or fear, or greed, but with quiet wonder, with understanding. And wasn't that what he had always wanted in the deep, lonely recesses of his soul? Not worship, not status, just someone who saw the man beneath the Armani suit. Someone who saw the cracks in his polished facade and didn't exploit them, but touched them with kindness. He didn't sleep. As the night bled into a gray dawn, a resolution formed in his heart. The anger dissipated, replaced by a painful, urgent clarity. He had made a mistake, the biggest of his life. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fix it. By morning, he knew where she would be. He didn't need an assistant to find out. He just needed to follow the trail of the truth he had ignored for so long. The Hongdae neighborhood was a world away from Gangnam. It was vibrant, chaotic, young, and artfully messy. Jin So-hyun, in his bespoke suit and Italian leather shoes, looked like a ghost from another universe as he walked the narrow, graffiti-lined streets. He followed the directions he'd gotten from his concierge, who in turn got them from the hotel's vendor registry. The flower shop, Sori Eopsi, was tucked into a narrow alley between an indie coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. It was small, with a storefront of olive green painted wood, and a window displaying a modest but beautiful arrangement of wildflowers. A small bell tinkled when he pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp earth, green leaves, and the overwhelming perfume of dozens of types of flowers. It was the opposite of his penthouse, small, a little cluttered, but incredibly, beautifully alive. And there she was. She had her back to him, wearing a canvas apron smudged with dirt, carefully trimming the thorns from a red rose. Her hair was up in a messy bun, and she moved with a familiar, graceful efficiency. This was her kingdom. Here she wasn't lost. She was in command. She must have sensed his presence because she turned. When her eyes met his, a complex mix of emotions flickered across her face. Shock, first. Then a glimmer of hope, quickly extinguished by fear and hurt. She drew herself up, wiping her hands on her apron, a subtle barrier between them. "You left?" he said softly. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of a painful fact. "You asked me to," she replied, her voice steady, but he could hear the fragility beneath it. He took a step forward, the sound of his leather shoes unnaturally loud in the quiet of the shop. "I was angry, but I wasn't angry at you." She didn't answer, just watched him, waiting. He took another step, closing the distance between them until he could see the faint, dried tear tracks on her cheeks. "I was angry at myself," he confessed, the vulnerability in his voice raw and real, "for never asking your name, for assuming, for being an arrogant, blind snob, for letting the best thing that's happened to me in years walk out the door without a fight." Her breath caught in her throat. "Then, why are you here?" she whispered, the hope she had tried to suppress now blooming dangerously in her chest. He stopped right in front of her. "To fight." The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't a wall or a chasm. It was a space to breathe, to decide, to begin again. It was a gentle silence, full of possibility. He held out his hand, not to take, but as an invitation. "Your name is Kang Ha-un," he said, his voice full of a regret that touched her deeply. "You own a flower shop in Hongdae. You like ginger tea and Debussy, and you have the most understanding eyes I have ever seen." She stared at his outstretched hand. "You didn't lie," he continued. "I just never listened. And if you'll let me, I want to start over. This time properly. No penthouse, no assumptions, no mistakes. Just Jin So-hyun and Kang Ha-un. Will you give me that chance?" A small, trembling smile bloomed on her lips. A fresh tear slid down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of relief. Slowly, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. The contact was electric, familiar, and brand new, all at once. "Okay," she said, her voice a little stronger. "Okay, So-hyun." And in that little flower shop, surrounded by lilies and roses and peonies, the scent of truth and new beginnings in the air, Two hearts that had met by mistake decided to bloom again, not because of a lie, but because love, when it's real, doesn't need perfect circumstances, or grand identities, or luxury penthouses. It just needs courage. The courage to see, to listen, and to fight for what truly matters. What about you? Do you believe they made the right choice? Would you have done the same in their place? Would you forgive So-hyun's assumptions or Ha-eun's omission? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion means so much to us. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys just like this one. Thank you for watching. We'll be back soon with another story of love, redemption, and hope.